Ed and Morgan sat in a small room with the customs inspector. He sat across the table from them, silently leafing through the stack of permits Ed had presented. He was about halfway through when he put the stack on the table and massaged the bridge of his nose. "Do you even have half the things you have permits for?" "I was in a rush and wanted to make sure I had all my bases covered." "There was a permit for a cannon. Are you planning on starting a war?" "Have you ever been in the wrong place at the wrong time?" "I just want to be cautious, sir, especially in a foreign country." "A cannon. How?" "Say that through a series of unfortunate events, one happens to end up in close proximity to me. No one else claims ownership, and any present authorities happen to think it's mine. I'd rather be left in charge of a cannon than go to jail for simply being near one." The inspector leaned over the table. "What's your business in our country?" Ed swallowed, remembering Morgan didn't tell him the specifics of their job. He looked at her, and she beamed back a wide, clueless smile and bright eyes. They had both agreed she wouldn't act any smarter than she had to, because some people don't take kindly to not being the smartest organism in the room when an anthro is present. Ed looked back to the inspector. "To soak up and appreciate as much of your culture as I can." He pointed at Ed's wrist. "What kind of watch is that?" "Digital. There's a permit in the stack." "Do you have a teller?" "Yes, sir." Ed patted his back pocket. "And the appropriate permits, too." "I heard you can make phone calls on those things now." "Well, they're still primarily for exchanging credits between people, but yes, they make calls, access the net, and do a couple other things, depending on the app or program you've downloaded." Ed didn't want to be patronizing, but he honestly wasn't sure if the inspector had any idea what those words meant. He gave a soft grunt in return, equal parts disgust at the rampant progression of technology, and genuine respect that they were able to even do it. He pointed to Ed's neck. "What about those goggles?" "Sorry?" "They match your watch. Are they digital? Do they do anything?" Of course, Ed wouldn't have a permit for them. Nothing like them existed in Ed City outside of Sector X. He forced a smile and put them on. "Only look cool. They're the new fashion. It's summer, I need shades. I mean, I guess they do protect my eyes, but, you know." The inspector leaned back. "Keep an eye on your animals and your toys. No one's going to help you find them if you lose them, and we don't want them floating around in our country." The two left the station, with Morgan holding onto Ed's arm. "My cheeks hurt." "I hate seeing it like that," he said, patting his pockets for the third time, making sure he didn't forget anything. "I love your sincere smiles. When I look in your eyes, I see dozens of unspoken thoughts." And it was one of those thoughts, and one of those many smiles he found shining at him from his shoulder in response. "What's with you getting poetic out of nowhere?" Ed checked his pulse. "It seems you hanging on to me has triggered a euphoric experience." "That's more like it. Why were you nervous back there?" "It was mostly an act. Ironically, it's the calm ones who are more likely hiding something. Or so I'm told." "Do you fake it with me?" "You know there's a better way to phrase that." "You're cute when I make you nervous. I think tonight—" "What? Tonight what?" She hurried forward, pulling him by the hand and flashing him a big, playful smile. One with lots of teeth. So many thoughts flooded his mind, he forgot to ask her what their job was again. Nipponese is a very old-fashioned country. Dusty dirt streets, short wooden buildings with tiled roofs, and hardly anything in the way of modern conveniences. Most homes don't have electricity. They're simply not built for it. The people, or at least the ones in charge, feel modern technology poses a risk to destroying something fundamentally human, that it takes jobs away and makes people soft, lazy, ungrateful, and detached. Of course, while an argument can be made that money can lead to similar problems, a number of those same people sit on pretty hefty coin purses nonetheless. Each evening, a lamplighter would walk down the street to light the candles atop the streetlights. Each morning, homes have to stoke the flames of their stove to cook breakfast. A few homes have large radios to tune into one of the 6 crackling stations. Films are silent, monochrome remakes of modern pictures and exclusively viewed in theaters. There's no air conditioning at all, to Ed's dismay, but vending machines are exceptionally popular. Morgan came out of a public restroom dressed in the local attire, a colorful, breezy example of it. With her tail and ears tucked away under a properly stylish sash and headband, she looked very native. Another blessing of her appearance was that her skin tone and features allowed her to easily slip in with most Mercian populations. How do I look? Like you're going to do something that's going to get me in trouble? Don't worry, I can keep a low profile. Ed took another gaze at her colorful attire. Hey, she waved her finger. Wouldn't it be more suspicious if a looker like me didn't dress a little showy? You just go and get us a room somewhere. My collar's in the bag. I'll use the tracker in it to catch up with you later. Why can't I just go with you? I feel like you're needlessly putting both of us at risk here. Stop worrying, you're going to get wrinkles, she said before running off. He sighed. Why am I worried? If we get deported, I'll just be back in the air conditioning. Elsewhere, a pale-skinned woman was partaking of the local cuisine. That's a rather fancy kimono you're wearing, miss, the server commented as he placed her food on the table. Going somewhere special? You are clearly not familiar with my people, she replied, looking at him with red irises. Everywhere we go is special, so we are raised to dress the part. He chuckled. Then I'm honored to have your presence grace my humble establishment. She helped herself to a small bite of food. You are certainly a capable chef. You should be proud. I hope to find many things as delicious in my time here. You keep coming back to my place, and I'll keep making you happy and full. Perhaps you could help me in another way, she smiled. Where might I find strong warriors? We have fighters all over Nipaness. Some are homegrown, some are just passing through on their way to Dynastasia or Southtown. But, word to the wise, in this world of ours, looks can be deceiving. The woman's smile widened further. Perhaps you do know something of my people. There was something about her smile. It may have been how the corners nearly touched her ears. It may have been how her porcelain-like flesh hardly moved. It may have been how her teeth followed her lips rather than adhering to any sort of jawline, like a child's drawing, not allowing something like the physical limitations of anatomy to get in the way of the spirit of the image. But it was something about her smile that made her server noticeably less jovial. Ed wandered the streets of Nipaness looking for an inn. He needed to be far enough away from the tourist hubs to avoid crowds, and not attracting many tourists would mean the owner would have to keep their prices lowered to remain competitive. He'd found a few inns, but they maintained high prices by catering to specific clientele, of which neither Morgan nor Ed were a part of, except maybe for one hotel, but they charged by the hour. He'd only been searching for 40 minutes, but the heat had long since gotten to him. The sun beating down from above, its heat wafting up numerous smells from below, and surrounded by people who were either hardly fazed by the heat or actually enjoyed it. It all reminded him of why he hated the summer. And it was only beginning. Each passing day was just going to get hotter. Each person was just going to get sweatier, and his patience would diminish with his energy. Burned away in the summer heat. Barca was enjoying himself, though. Perhaps if he placed him on his hat, people would consider him too weird to talk to, or just weird enough to lock up. Or perhaps they'd be encouraged to talk to him because of it. He'd need time to discern the locals' tolerance for eccentric foreigners. A breeze tickling his ear drew his attention toward the alleyway he was about to pass. It was unremarkable as far as alleyways went, but he decided to cut through in order to check the next street over for affordable lodgings. He was halfway through when he heard a voice whisper behind him. It caused him to stop, but his goggles, neither warning him of danger, nor even detecting the whisper, caused him to run through possible explanations rather than actually turn around. Auditory hallucination? A telepath, perhaps? Then another voice from behind clearly shouted out, "Wait! Don't turn around!" "I wasn't planning on it," Ed called back, still looking ahead. "Is this supposed to be a long-distance mugging?" "Please, just trust me," the voice said earnestly. "Just stand there for a moment and don't turn around. Please." Ed scrolled through options on his watch, selecting his goggles' rear-view thermal imaging. He was curious, but cautious. There was a chance that whatever was behind him had a petrifying visage or some other manner of sight-based ability. The person-shaped blob of heat behind him was moving his hands in a curious manner and, based on heat fluctuations, seemed to be drawing in energy. Either a slow-building meta-ability or a spell being prepared to be cast. Ed readied himself. The figure launched the mysterious force in Ed's direction, and he dodged to the side. That's when he saw it. A towering, translucent green skeleton was looming over him. Oh, Ed thought. It's one of those Nipponese ghosts that appear from behind and kill you when you turn around. Why didn't I consider this option? This next part should be interesting and horrifying. Its massive ghostly claws slashed through Ed's chest in the moment before he hit the ground. Just as the energy blast from earlier hit the specter, causing it to vanish with a howl. A successful exorcism. "Mister!" A young man ran to Ed's side before slumping his shoulders in defeat. "I'm so sorry. I hope your soul will be able to find peace." "I'm not dead," Ed groaned as he sat up, ignoring the man's squeak of surprise. "I was only taking a moment to assess what just happened." "You were attacked. Not by me, though," he hurriedly added. Ed looked the boy over. The dark hair and brown skin said he was Gahoshan. Colorful clothes, feathers, and beads meant he was a shaman. His soft features meant he'd be a hit with both sexes, but Ed was never good at discerning age. "How old are you?" 16. "Why?" "Mostly just idle curiosity." "I'm sorry, how did you survive that?" Ed got on his feet and dusted himself off. "Don't they say interacting with spirits is a two-way street? I've been told I have a really weak spirit. It must have been like trying to grab at water or something." "That doesn't make sense. Besides, I can see your spirit just fine." He went to touch Ed's chest, but palmed Barca under his shirt. The little dragon readjusted himself, resulting in another startled reaction from the young man. He has that effect on people. "Oh, that's not you." He tried to catch his breath. "I'm sorry, are you an android?" "Oh, that's sweet, but no," he said, genuinely flattered. "Like I said, weak spirit. This is Barca, by the way. He's something of a pet. I guess him taking the hit for me might be a more plausible explanation. If he was the one hit, he should be dead." "He may be small, but he's sturdy." The young man was clearly confused by the whole situation. The giant skeleton ghost was by far the most normal part. "May I see your hand?" Ed complied. The boy felt his hand a bit. "Ah, I feel it now." He quickly withdrew his hands to hold back his breakfast. Or maybe his lunch. I think it was past noon by this point. "I'm sorry, I've never felt such—" "Forget it." Ed waved away the thought. "If I was offended every time I'd driven people to vomit, I'd never leave my room. Actually, come to think of it, I hardly leave my room as it is." He looked at Barca, who was now sitting on his shoulder. "Why am I in this country again?" "Well, you seem to be all right, all things considered." "I gather you're not a local. Would your lodging happen to have a vacancy?" "Oh, yes, the inn's close by. If you're interested, just follow me." The two were some distance away from the alley when he spoke again. "I'm a Teppy, by the way. Edward Eldridge." The two went to shake hands, but mutually decided against it. Feel free to call me any variation of it." "It's nice to meet you." "I don't have a segue for this, so I'll just ask. Any knowledge of a Jiroguma in the area?" Teppy was taken aback. Why would you want to know that?" "I've been in the market for something that you can only get from one of them. Being a shaman, I figured you'd be the one to ask." "How much experience do you have with spirits, Edward?" "As far as I know, that was the first." "It might be best to keep that as the last. It might also be wise to avoid walking down dark alleys. Pro tip, if you don't want a stranger to turn around, maybe don't shout, 'Don't turn around!' from behind them." The two shared a chuckle. Elsewhere, Morgan came to a small shop sandwiched in between two larger buildings. A sweaty, rotund man sat outside one of the two buildings, cooling off before the oncoming lunch rush. He gave Morgan as thorough a scan as he could in the time she walked past. She gave him her "thanks for noticing, but stop noticing so hard" smile and went in. Inside the small outlet, a woman with a brunette ponytail and prismatic eyes stood behind the counter, chatting to a petite androgynous individual on the other side, dressed in red. Upon her entrance, their conversation ceased. The one in red pocketed a small bag from the counter and left confidently, shooting Morgan a curious smile on the way out. She paid little attention to the person and approached the woman. "Hi, Morgan," she beamed. "I wasn't expecting you back so soon." "My partner was easier to convince than I thought." "I've been meaning to ask, what's he like? Must be quite a guy to keep you coming back." "He's an acquired taste. He has a habit of getting into trouble when I'm not around, so I don't want to leave him alone for too long." "I get it." She placed a sizable bag and a small booklet on the counter. Here's your gear from your last job, and a list of your new clients and their appointments. Thanks, Kazumi. I'll be back with your cut at the end of the month. Oh, and Morgan? Kazumi stopped her as she was leaving. You know your last client is in town now, right? I have his address if you're interested. She thought for a moment. Couldn't hurt. You sure your partner won't get jealous? She smiled. I don't know what you mean. Here we are. Atepi presented the inn to Ed. I still have business to attend to, but Haruka will get you settled in. She's the owner? Yeah, she may seem standoffish, but she's really a kind woman. Take care now. The two waved each other off, and Ed stepped past the curtain to the inn's tavern. There were a couple tables, chairs, and booths about. The woman behind the bar was reading the paper when he walked in. She looked up at him with world-weary eyes, then brushed some of her short brown hair over her ear and put out her cigarette in a nearby ashtray. Welcome to Haruka's Inn. Interested in a room? Hers was the voice of a business owner who would love her job if not for the customers. It took all of her energy just to emulate the enthusiasm of an employee called into work on their day off. I am, he responded. What's your policy on pets? Keep them out of the kitchen and my room. She motioned to the appliances behind her in the bar and the stairway off to the right, respectively. And as long as they're quiet and don't make any messes. No problem. One lizard, one anthro-cat, both human-level intelligence. That's fine, then. She led him off to the left of the bar. She didn't even have to unlock the sliding door to the room. Futons are in the closet, men's and women's baths are at the end of the hall, toilets to the left, laundry room to the right. It's 2,500 zenny a night, and no room service. Any questions? Yeah, are you single? That actually got a reaction out of her. One of her eyebrows lowered. What? Ed threw his luggage into the room. I asked if you have a menu. She looked him over with a discerning eye. No, you tell me what you want, and I do my best. Then I'd like one serving of your recommendation, please. Coming up. She headed back to the bar before turning her head back to him. And watch the pickup lines or you'll find an extra 0 on your bill. Pickup lines? I just wanted to make sure you weren't plural. She gave no reaction. He gave a wry smile. I'm a scamp. She rolled her eyes as she turned back around, but Ed caught a quick glimpse of a very slight smile. Or he thought he did. Really, she was just unsticking her cheek from her teeth. An hour later, Morgan pocketed her tracker as she stepped into Haruka's inn. Haruka was back to reading her paper behind the counter. Excuse me, Morgan spoke up. Have you seen a... First room on the left, she interrupted. I guess you don't have many tenants. Haruka glanced up at her, then went back to her paper. Morgan entered the room and laid the bag on the floor by their luggage. The contents were made of wood and metal from the sound of it. Ed was sprawled out on the floor. Not a bad place, Morgan said. Even the owner seems like your type. I signed myself up to help her on a part-time basis. I should have waited until I found out what exactly you signed me up for, but like you said, she's my type. Don't worry, we're self-employed. You'll have plenty of time to juggle 2 women in your life. I know you're joking, but stop it. So, what, do you get a discount working here? She's going to teach me how to cook. She's good, and it's a skill I haven't picked up yet. I'm starting to wonder if I should be jealous. I hate my type. I always get stupid around my type. She played with her hair. So I guess I'm not your type? He paused for a moment, then hopped up and pointed at her. You get me so stupid I keep forgetting to ask what my job is. Geez, I wonder how smart you are when I'm not around then. Don't dodge the question. She smiled before going over to her bag. You still haven't asked it. He hissed at her. She stood up and began changing her clothes. We're exterminators. Our gear's in the bag. He scurried over to look inside. What's in here? Spray cans and sticks? That's not... And he saw blades, chains, and a pair of shotguns. And a gourd bottle. Runes etched into the weapons and gourd indicated they were Raksha, magical items from the neighboring planet Kanar. He pulled the gourd out of the bag. What's with the rabbit in the lion's den? You drink from it and you can breathe fire. Sorry, what are we exterminating exactly? Beelzebugs. You've heard of them, right? Bringers of filth and harbingers of decay, bugs the size of footballs believed to originate in some forgotten arcane nether realm. No, that's not them. No, they're the size of basketballs. I don't know what creature you're thinking of. I'd rather tangle with the roaches at McDudley's. Morgan looked at him with a raised eyebrow. Okay, maybe not. Don't worry, you're just my assistant. You carry the stuff, go into places too dirty for me, and shower me with compliments. I'll handle the hard part. Barca was sitting atop a dresser, pondering thoughts too gruesome to detail in regards to if he were to encounter such a bug on his own. A sense of excited curiosity barely won out over any sense of terror or irony on trading places on the food chain. Later, Morgan and Ed, with Barca under his overshirt, eventually reached their first client, a Nipponese steakhouse. Unlike with most exterminators, business owners proudly show that they've hired Beelzebub killers because bee-bugs only wallow in the cleanest of locations where those bringers of filth can do the most harm. Spitting in the face of biological imperatives, these monsters seem far more concerned with being a nuisance than actually surviving as a species. How they've managed to survive continues to confound researchers. Morgan stood atop the bar to remove a ceiling board, then hopped down. Up you go, handsome. What? Ed protested. I thought you were supposed to handle the hard part. Do you have any idea how hard it was to get this job? People don't think too highly of anthros, she said sadly. Ed decided if the rest of the summer was going to be like this, he could coax a bigger percentage out of her later. Fine, but I'll need one of those Raksha. Morgan handed him a box cutter. He extended the blade. These runes are written in felt tip. I don't think they'll notice, she shrugged with a smile. He reluctantly climbed up through the hole. It was going to be a much bigger percentage than 35. He tried to navigate through the cramped darkness. The rising steam from the grills didn't make his time any more pleasant. Normally, he could handle such discomfort by listening to heavy metal, but he needed to keep his ears open for any clicks or buzzing. With his luck, a bee-bug would sneak up behind him and lay eggs in his backside in the middle of a power ballad. Unfortunately, all he could really hear was Morgan laughing as she ate free steak, while a bunch of guys compared her beauty to something his growls of frustration drowned out. He cursed summer jobs. He cursed this hot, tight, splinter-filled nightmare. He cursed Morgan. Then he cursed his own stupidity for not using his goggles to scan the place. He put them on and bioscanned the darkness. To his left, he saw a large green organic mass. He praised himself for finding the nest. He began to turn around so he could get the magic gourd from Morgan. He flipped to night vision so he could find his way back to the hole, and it was then that he saw the mother hadn't quite given birth yet. She also looked pretty agitated. Down in the restaurant, Morgan's fan club was interrupted from their admiration of her beauty by the sound of guttural swearing in a dead language. A massive bug, the size of a large pig, smashed through the ceiling with Ed gripping tightly to its underbelly, laughing maniacally. Until, in its wavering, it ran him along the grills. All that accomplished was some first-degree burns, and for his laughter to become even louder and more insane. He wrestled it to the ground, pulled out the box cutter, and eviscerated it. Then a swarm of golf ball-sized babies exploded from the carcass and attacked Ed. Morgan quickly, yet nonchalantly, grabbed the engraved gourd bottle from her bag. With a gulp of its contents, she spewed out a wave of fire towards Ed and incinerated all trace of the insects. And he was mostly unscathed, even the carpet unscorched. Despite having been engulfed in flames and now straddling a burning carcass, the heat, while unpleasant, was no worse than what he felt while up in the rafters. The fire didn't burn anything Morgan didn't want it to, a detail she neglected to mention. She stifled a smoky belch and smiled at him. Well, I think I earned my 70%. Ed got up and dusted himself off with his hat. He was down to 30%. A minor setback. He wasn't covered in viscera. That was a plus. If he could get some ice for his back, the day would be on par with his expectations. Within the next restaurant, Ed emerged from the kitchen holding 2 dead Beelzebeetles, and having a large stinger impaled through his left shoulder. It was still on par. He showed them to Morgan. Now this should be worth a raise. Why? Because you weren't paying attention and got hurt? Again? Because I took a stinger for you. If this didn't pass straight through, I'd be dead from the venom, literally rotted from the inside out. I doubt even you'd leave that pretty of a corpse after that. And good luck finding anyone else who'll keep working after getting impaled. The barkeep spoke up. Doesn't that hurt? Ed gave a wide smile, but the rest of his face didn't reflect it. I'm screaming internally. She took another sip of her drink. You're right, Ed. All right, you're back up to 30%. Awesome. Wait, what? Morgan helped him rip off his overshirt as the barkeep dropped a bag of copper zenny coins on the bar for the duo's payment. Morgan slid him a shot of strong booze she ordered for him. Here, this will help with the pain. Thanks. He poured it over his wound and winced a little. Smooth. You have some healing salts, right? He pulled a small plastic vial from one of the pockets on his belt. You take it out and I'll pour? Don't worry. Don't say I'm not doing my part. She slid it out in one smooth motion, and Ed quickly poured the granules from the vial into the wound. There was a loud sizzling sound, barely drowned out by Ed pounding on the bar in pain. A white foam bubbled up around the wound before settling down into a lightly sizzling plaster. He wiped away a single tear. That'll wake you up. The barkeep was holding down both his lunch and breakfast. It was definitely that late in the day. A young waiter who'd just stepped in was left slack-jawed. Morgan tightly tied his overshirt around his shoulder. With a boyfriend like you, who needs safe words? I'd like to think if I had one, it would be Tangelo. A woman's cry of protest was heard from one of the booths. A young waitress was being harassed by a group of men. Ed noticed the owner holding the waiter back from helping. Don't do it, Takedo. There's 4 of them. Ed let out a slow, growling sigh, and Morgan put her hand on his injured shoulder. Control your anger and let this one go. Save it for the next creep. He breathed deep. I am in control. Let's go before I lose it. The two headed for the door when a familiar couple walked in. Hey, Eddie. Small world, huh? Remember us? Lonnie and Janet from the train? Ed whispered in Morgan's ear. Lost it. He sat Morgan at the bar. Operation Tip for Tap. She sighed and waved Lonnie and Janet to leave. It took them a minute to gather the situation, but Lonnie caught on when he saw Ed walking off to the men harassing the waitress. He backed her up while staying in the doorway to watch. Ed strolled over to the men. Pardon me, gents. Since the lady doesn't seem interested, perhaps I can introduce you to a more willing young lady? He turned his injured shoulders slightly to the bar. The man holding the waitress tightly by the arm followed his gesture. When Morgan waved, he grinned. How about you bring her over, too? The more the merrier, right? I'm glad you agree. Here's Betty. He tossed one of the dead bee bugs into the man's face. With a scream of terror similar to the young waitress's, he let her go and she ran behind Ed. The man stood and threw the bug to the side. Ed selected the assisted combat function from his watch. Someone needs to teach you guys some manners. Then his 3 friends stood up and retrieved their swords from under the table. Ed cleared his throat. Miss, you might want to step back, and maybe call an ambulance. Ed had approximately 23 plans thought out for handling bar fights. Some for fights he started, others that were started with him, others he was dragged into. One's for any type of bar he could think of, one's depending on how close he was to the bar, how many he'd have to fight, and who was with him. He even had tactics lined up for covering various powers and abilities and handling opponents armed with guns, knives, chains, and improvised weapons. And he never even went to bars willingly. But 4 men with swords in a predominantly wooden drinking establishment? 2 factors he had not considered. If he got out of this alive, he would have 24 plans for dealing with bar fights. If not, well, it wouldn't really matter, would it? The man he insulted attacked while his friends stood back and watched. Ed dodged the first slash. The second would have hit if not for the goggles. He could only dodge. He couldn't get past the blade to retaliate. He scurried under a table, popped out the other side, and threw Barca at the man's face. As predicted, another high-pitched scream as he swatted Barca to the side, and Ed swung a chair at the man. One of the men to the side shouted, Cusseau! He threw a snake! Ed raised the chair over his head for another attack at the man on the ground, but froze. He slowly turned his head to the other 3. It's not a snake if it has legs, you idiot. It's a mutant snake, another commented. You know those people from Edge, added the third. They're always turning animals into freaks. Ed's eye twitched. "You greasy, shag-eared, low-bred, unburdened, arse-brains, mentally deficient, sodding morons!" And he threw the chair at them, which inspired them to take a stab at him. Literally. Ed flipped himself over a table and rolled back against the far wall to create some distance and gain a few seconds to think of a new plan. And noticed an old man sitting on the table beside him, just reading a book as if there weren't 4 men trying to murder someone in the same room. But that wasn't as important as the fact that the old man had a katana hanging from the back of his chair. Ed pulled the sword from the sheath as his assailant came for him and blocked a downward slash. At the sound of the impact, his muscles seized up and the world began to haze over. His body felt cold, then a warm pressure swallowed him up. The sound of a second impact brought him back to reality. His body had brought the sword around to block a sideways attack on its own. It pushed the man back and proceeded with its own attack. He was experiencing everything but had no control over his body, not even his eyes. He was moving so quick and fluidly that the man could only block. His blows were so powerful that each strike chipped away at the man's own sword. Ed decided to let whatever was happening carry on a bit longer. It was saving his life, so he didn't offer the slightest protest. When the man raised his sword to block Ed's downward slash, it shattered, and Ed's blade stopped an inch from the man's face. He fell to the ground in fear, and Ed's body ran up the man's front and leapt into the air, ready to deal with the other 3. Moments later, the 4 men ran out of the restaurant with tattered clothes and broken swords. Ed returned to his senses and found his body exhausted. He didn't even realize he'd blacked out. But he was back in full control now. He checked to see both he and his clothes were undamaged, and whatever took control of him didn't kill the men. Or, more importantly, it didn't set him up for murder. But his muscles felt drained, like several hours of a full-body workout. Whatever possessed him pushed his body towards its limits. It demanded more power from his flabby, out-of-shape self could reliably deliver. He checked his shoulder. It was numb, but not bleeding. He managed to squeeze in one quick fight while the plaster was still malleable, but it was already starting to harden. Once that happened, his shoulder would be tender for the next week while it healed. He'd also have to avoid using it too much in that time. He looked over to Morgan, who was shuffling Lonnie and Janet back outside. No more than a minute had passed since he grabbed the sword, and he was already so drained. The waitress, however, was awestruck. He felt himself smile at her as the strength in his arm began to return. Like a pleasant warmth that flowed from his chest, revitalizing him. He picked up the 4 coin purses he just remembered he'd slashed off the men's belts. He dropped 3 on the bar. "I apologize for the damages, friend. I hope this will cover the repairs." He handed the biggest of the 4 to the waitress. "And I'd say you more than earned this tip, miss." She timidly accepted. "Thank you, sir." As they gazed into each other's eyes, Ed put his hand on her shoulder. "Is your arm all right? I'd hate if such a lovely young lady like you were to be injured." "Sir, She unconsciously brought her lips closer to his, as he did to hers. Before they actually kissed, and before the waiter Takeru could stomp over, the short old man tapped Ed in the side with the sheath. "Excuse me, young man." "Ah, sorry, old-timer." Ed slid the sword back into the sheath. Suddenly, Ed's desire to spend a romantic evening with the young lady vanished entirely. And that's when he noticed Takeru had broken away from his boss's grip and marched up to him. He seemed about as mad as before, but slightly more confident about his chances of getting the less hostile Ed away from her. But Ed put his hand on his shoulder before he could say or do anything. "Hey man, thanks for letting me take care of those guys." He turned to the confused girl. "I don't know what this guy is to you, but he was chomping at the bit to tear those guys up and save you. But he was nice enough to give me the chance to show off for my girl. She was just here a second ago." And back to Takeru. "Anyway, thanks again, man." Takeru was dumbfounded. The old man asked the waitress for some tea, and she went to oblige after giving Takeru a sweet smile. Then Takeru gave Ed a smile and nodded before joining her. "That was nice of you," the old man said, running his fingers across the page of the book he was reading at a nearby table. Ed shook his head as he sat across from the old man. "I suppose I'm not too bad at peaceful resolutions when my head's clear. Sorry for taking your magic sword without asking. Can I pick up your tab and we'll call it square?" "That won't be necessary, and it's not magic, technically." Ed looked it over as it hung on the back of the old man's chair. "Well, it's hardly a normal sword." He smiled. I didn't say it was, though you display some notable skill with it. You saw that, huh? Not really. I'm blind. Sorry. Don't be. It was quite impressive. Well, I hardly did much. Once I grabbed it, it felt like something possessed me. Are you familiar with testimonia? Now there's an old term. Most people these days just call them Amarantine relics. Artifacts older than any known written history, but don't show a day of age on them. Supposedly indestructible. Then it dawned on Ned to stop showing off his knowledge for a moment. Hey, if that's one of them, if that's supposed to be one of them, that belongs in a museum. Now, he waved away the argument, I've only recently come across it, and while I typically agree this sword has business here in Nipaness. Well, it does seem pretty willful, but testimonia, though? How old are you using a term like that? Younger than I look, and I just prefer the term. More accurate. Less of a mouthful. Well, I'd like to talk more, but we're both busy men, so I'll leave you to it. He got up to leave. My name is Balso. Ed stopped and introduced himself. Edward, said Balso, you appear to be in tune with the sword. Are you interested in it? There's no way I could afford something like that. I could offer it as payment. I believe I'd like to hire your services. Doing what, exactly? I'll give you the details later, but not now. Not here. And why not? It's almost the end of the chapter. Pardon? Balso tapped the book he was holding. Oh.